Welcome, Internet, to Psychoanalytic Talk, and today we're going to be talking about intellectualization, both the process and the defense mechanism. So, how are we going to talk about it? Well, we're going to talk about it first and foremost as the process itself, and secondly as the defense mechanism. So, at the core, what is intellectualization? Intellectualization is a mental or psychic process in which the individual organizes experience through the lens of knowledge. So what is very important with this is to understand that at a certain level, intellectualization is completely fine and even normal. One would even say that if you're going through academia, it's essential. The idea behind it is to make the world, to give the world extra meaning, to be able to understand what is happening in the world. For Anna Freud, daughter of Freud, intellectualization is one of the main victories of mankind, as it allows us to understand what is happening. That understanding is so very paramount to everything. For example, the fact that I'm talking to you through this phone is the result of intellectualization processes. We understand how certain things work, how we can use them, how we can turn them to advantage. All of these things are forms of intellectualization. And without that, our civilization itself would not be the way it is if it wasn't for intellectualization. So my aim here is to make you understand that it's not about pathologizing or saying that intellectualization in of itself is mental illness, because it isn't. It's a basic, fundamental process of mankind, and I would even go so far as to say it's a need. And so many things go through the lens of this intellectualization, from basically writing an essay, filming a video like I'm doing now, reading a book. All of these things are not in the realm of emotion, but that of knowledge. That realm is not necessarily perfect, right? Because some things need to be experienced, need to be lived. And therefore, there has to be a good balance between the phenomenology, i.e. the lived experience of what is happening to oneself, and the fact of being able to intellectualize, i.e. give it meaning, make understanding, for example, the patterns behind it, understanding like the reasoning, and having to try and think of how did it become, where is it going, where am I ending up if I go through this. So all of this is very important. So in the best case scenario, intellectualization isn't meant to dampen or harm the emotional experience, but to sublimate it, to be able to give it an understanding about it, and to be able also to take a step back through it. And that's the best case scenario. And this is the, let's say, normal, and even I'm going so far to say good intellectualization. Now we're going to be moving on to intellectualization as a defense mechanism. So all of what I've said still remains true, but in psychotherapy, often some patients, instead of looking within, instead of trying to correlate that emotional understanding I was saying previously, well, they're not going to do that. They're even going to be smart enough, or let's say disposed to intelligence enough to be able to try and like code it with something, code it with a special language, with a special vocabulary. For example, instead of saying I hurt, or I was hurt, or I feel so much pain, the patient is going to very, very interestingly say things like, oh, well, this has awoken in me the anti-libidinal ego, la fern burn. Or say something like, oh, this is deep resentment of my superego, on my ego. And all of these things tend to feed as what we call resistance, i.e. the person is not looking really within. They're building fancy explanation for what is happening, but they're not really engaging with it. In a way, what is happening is that they are put in a prison, so to speak. So the architecture might seem wonderful when someone does intellectualization well enough, but the idea is that they're gating in their emotional experience. They're not living it, they're not experiencing it, they're just like looking at it from afar. And a bit like a prison, the experience is not free to come forward, the subjectivity, the emotional impacts aren't expanding themselves into the individual's mind, and even at an interpersonal level. Quite the opposite, it remains gated, shut, and static, and often the whole work of the analyst or the therapist is to try and make that prison less and less important, less and less rigid. So, in my understanding of it, and in my clinical work, what I have seen work the best is not confrontationally trying to break the prison. You can't make them escape, because then it creates panic. Intellectualization, if it is employed as a defense mechanism, was employed for a reason. The patient has built that defense mechanism for a reason. And that reason is often to avoid an unconscious anxiety, to try and be able to master or repress the unconscious mind. So therefore, it's very important not to try and wreck it, as that will create something in which the ego, the being of the person, will feel under threat, both of the therapy and in himself. And in the worst case scenarios, they can even terminate therapy by fear of being hurt or having their emotions hurt them, as if it's taken out of the container of intellectualization, i.e. the prison, then it can wreak havoc on the mind. So it's very important to be able to take it very slowly, step by step, moment by moment. It's going to be even more important if the person has experienced trauma. Because remember, trauma is something that doesn't necessarily link in the narrative of the person. It doesn't fit well. It's always like a foreign element in the mind. Therefore, the intellectualization allows it to be contained. That containment in of itself is not a bad sin. Sin, as I was saying, not in of itself. Therefore, it is very important not to break it too quickly. The whole aim is for the patient to be able to develop their internal security and interpersonal with the therapist, to be able to slowly let the emotional side come through the container. Being able to welcome, in a way, as we would say, accueillir in French, i.e. to be able to give a space to what that emotional experience is, and also a place for the unconscious mind, in which sins can happen, slips, just laughter, whole range of experiences can then move forward, but it cannot move forward from the get-go. Therefore, it's very important not to cut off intellectualization, as even though we might have the feeling that the patient is losing time in his therapy, time being instead of being 2-year therapy, it goes on for 3 years. I mean, this is a hypothetical example, but for you to get the understanding, we might have this sensation that we are running out of time or losing time to this defense mechanism, but it can't be any other way, because for the work to really function, the patient has to be able to trust that the therapist can welcome that emotion, but that he himself can free it in his mind. Therefore, a very long job, and as we would say in French, un travail de longue haleine, meaning a long-term job. Now, there is also, and very interestingly enough, the case of intellectualizations that are so subtle. For example, those subtle cases are put forward by Carl Abraham, that there are cases in which the patients will give the impression that they having great insights, incredible breakthroughs into their mind and into the emotional realm. But he says that sometimes it can be tricky, because what is happening actually is that the patient is seeing what the analyst wants and giving them what they think the analyst wants. And if they're good with that pretense or that posturing, the analyst can be fooled, meaning that this is a high level of intellectualization in which even the therapist may not see the intellectualization. Because what I was saying earlier was a caricature, but other things can happen. For example, someone talking about the abuse that really happened. I'm using air quotes because it does happen, but it's taken into a ramification of intellectualness that makes it look as if it isn't, because the intellectualization isn't above it. It's not like protecting it. It's underneath it. Meaning that basically, once you've gone through the crust of the apparent trauma, the trauma being real in this case, of course I'm not denying it, but in a way the traumatic experience is a layer beneath the intellectualization. So the intellectualization is masquerading as the emotional experience of trauma, but it isn't that. So that's why I'm calling this form pseudo. It's pseudo emotional understanding, because it's in lies the intellectualization. The person has, for example, read about trauma, read how it works, read how they're supposed to feel, what they're supposed to think. Therefore, they take all of that knowledge and they use it to present trauma that the therapist will obviously think that it is a great form of progress. But underneath, what is happening is that there's this intellectualization process of, yes, this is what psychoanalysis is doing. It's about talking about your traumas. Therefore, I'm going to talk about my trauma. But what I as a patient am doing is that I'm presenting something that's not the full extent of it. And I might not even be consciously aware of it, but I'm only presenting a very selected facet of what is happening. And then beneath I have this layer of complete intellectual understanding of the phenomena that then hides the deepest and the most impactful form of emotional trauma that's still contained very deep down. It's as if like the prison was open, so therefore the analyst is like, oh, this is great, there's no intellectualization, the intellectualization has receded, but the prison is empty, and then the analyst is realizing what is happening. And what is happening is that in a bunker somewhere deep, that's where the emotion is held, but the bunker is not known until you've reached the prison. So this is a very interesting position that Abraham takes when he talks about that. And it's also one of the main reasons why the analysts and psychotherapists on the whole have to always be wary of patients that are just exceptional or very good or too well. The perfect analysan does not exist. The perfect patient does not exist. And if ever they do, then it means that something is going wrong in a way, because nobody is perfect in the material. Nobody is defense-free. And if it looks defense-free, then it should tingle our sense that something is amiss. And that, I find it very interesting. So here we have 3 levels of intellectualization. One of the human kind, a normal kind of understanding experience through the lens of intelligence. Second, the defense mechanism that overrides emotional experience and contains it. And a third and final form of intellectualization in which the container seems empty, but it's because underneath it is the real experience, and the intellectualization makes it look as if it was filled, but it isn't. So this is pretty much it for this video. I hope you found it interesting. As always, if you have any questions, you feel free to put them in the comments. I'll read them and I'll answer them. And if you have anything else to add, feel free to do so. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.